All right, so I think I will get started while a few people are still joining. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today in this session, this webinar on due diligence in fashion. So today I have with me Marie Busk, who will join me in a talk about how due diligence, how you can work with due diligence and what it means for the fashion industry, where you should get started. A few things about the current due diligence tools, what are there and what possibilities are there, how to get started with those. Also a short chat about the role of certifications, and in the end some questions. And if you have any question during this, just type it in the chat, and I will either ask the question runningly or in the end of this session. So my name is Anja Paget. I am the ESG advisor here at Deloc. And it's my pleasure to take you through today. So welcome, Marie.
Thank you very much.
And we just have, if I can get this going, a slide with you, Marie. So if you could maybe just say a few words about yourself and your role today.
Yes, so my name is Marie and I head up the sustainability work at Danish Fashion and Textile, and we are the industry association for Danish fashion and textile companies. We have approximately 350 members, spanning both textile producing companies, but also sourcing companies. So we work with, I have a long background in sustainability, not from the fashion and textile industry, but from various others companies. So I worked in pharmaceutical, in toys, and in consumer goods, broadly. A bit about Danish fashion and textile and our sustainability work is that we have a policy arm doing influencing work, and then we engage in a lot of advisory services for our members on sustainability.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the big broad question we'll start off with today is what is due diligence? I've put up just an explanation that comes directly from some of the things that are out there, a basic expectation for all companies in that they respect and work structured with human rights and environmental impact in their value chains. But can you say a bit more about what due diligence is in fashion as well, like the combination of those two things together?
Yes. Allow me to just go a bit back in time and also explain where the concept comes from, because it is something which is quite difficult and abstract to grasp, because it's very much about a process. So basically, due diligence is a process by which you systematically work with ensuring that you respect human rights and the environment throughout the value chain. So it's a concept that comes from the financial world in mergers and acquisitions, but then it was brought up into the space of sustainability and corporate responsibility back in 2011 via something called the UN Guiding Principles for Human Rights. So they developed sort of a stepwise process on how do you actually do this. And then that process was later on, it was adopted by the UN. It was included in something which is called the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. And in 2019, a specific guidance was developed for the garment sector. And how do you actually do due diligence within the garment supply chain? So it's a process that consists of various steps in order to ensure that you do it systematically. Yeah.
Good. And coming to today and also talking a bit about the future, what will happen in a sense for the demands that will hit the textile industry. A lot of talk about the EU strategy. What will it entail? When will it be affected for the industry? And then zooming in on due diligence. Can you tell a bit about what is the current status and what to expect? What do you think will
yeah. So
challenge it?
I think the textile strategy, which came out a bit more than a year ago, is a strategy specifically for textiles, and it puts out defines an ambition and a vision. What is it? What kind of products do we want to have within the EU market? But also what kinds of companies do we want to have in the EU market? How do we want them to work with human rights and the environment and with sustainability in general? So in general, we see that there is a movement from CSR and sustainability being something which has been very much voluntarily, and the guidelines that I just spoke to, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights and the OECD guidelines, they are what we call soft law. So these are voluntary guidelines that you can take up and work with, but they're not law. And what we're seeing right now, not only within textiles, but actually across the board for all sectors and all kinds of financial and economic activities, is a move towards or development towards hard law and compliance. And we also see that within due diligence, because just last year there was a specific directive launched for how to do due diligence. It's called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, also called the CSDDD. So that's just, and I think we will speak a little bit more about that later. But I think going back to the textile strategy, that is the textile strategy is not one law, but it defines a vision, it defines an ambition for the European textile industry. And in order for that vision and these ambitions to become reality, it is pointing to a number of various instruments. We have counted up to 16 different different regulatory instruments, and one of these is due diligence.
Yeah.
There's something about, yeah. So last year we saw the proposal for the due diligence directive, and it's been going through a long process. Basically, what the due diligence directive does is that it takes these voluntary guidelines and translates it into law. Yeah. And right now we have the final negotiations on what should the exact text look like, and we do expect the proposal or the directive to be agreed upon this year. And then it will be an EU directive, hopefully as harmonized as possible across the EU. What you have probably also encountered, at least some of you, those that work in Norway and also in Germany, is that parallel to the EU development, we also see national developments on developing national human rights due diligence legislation. So in Germany, they have a law, Lieferketten, something, I can't remember the exact word, sorry. In Norway, we also have a law. From our perspective, we see there's a great value in harmonizations, because then we agree on and have a common framework on what is due diligence and what are the exact requirements towards companies.
Yeah, for the whole EU.
Yes, for across the EU. And I think from the implementation process of the directive will be focusing on the larger companies, and there will also be a limit. It's still being negotiated exactly how this limit should look like, but I think it will be around 250 employees and a 40 million turnover euros. So that will mean that a lot of small and medium-sized companies will actually be out of scope directly, but not indirectly, because due diligence is about value chain responsibility, value chain transparency. So it will mean that, and that we're seeing already, that the bigger companies are passing out their requirements towards their suppliers, and that will very often be the smaller companies, the smaller brands selling into Zalando, Amazon, and some of the bigger companies that will be in scope earlier than the smaller companies. This is a piece of legislation that will impact all companies one way or the other.
Yeah, it will triple down the effect.
Exactly. Yes.
Somebody like Zalando will then have to ask for the same things, and then all the way down.
Exactly.
And And you told me yesterday that it's of course new that it also is regarding the environment. That previously due diligence processes has only been about human rights, but with this directive, it also entails the environmental impact.
Yes, yeah. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the term, using the term due diligence within a corporate responsibility and sustainability context was introduced by the UN Guiding Principles, and that was only for human rights.
Yeah.
But actually, when it was brought up by or included into the OECD guidelines, it was broadened to also include consumer rights, responsible taxation, business ethical conduct, and also the environment and product safety. And that is also the case with this directive. It mentions specifically human rights and the environment. And then there has also been a proposal to actually include climate targets within the legislation as well, making it binding for companies to make climate strategies and climate CO2 targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And I think it's one of the issues that are being discussed, because of course it's controversial to put in binding targets within a directive. So we will see what it ends up looking like.
Very interesting, and something to prepare for.
Definitely, yes.
So the process, I've taken this, I'll show where this is from a bit later, but can you just briefly talk a bit about, getting started with the due diligence process? What would that entail?
Yes, so as I mentioned, the due diligence is a process. So it's systematizing basically your sustainability and your responsibility work. And in the OECD guidance, it comprises of 6 steps. And this model comes from a tool that we developed 1.5 years ago, together with the Danish Institute for Human Rights, which is an organization that's done a lot of work with applying human rights to businesses. So we have simplified it slightly to make it more manageable and also more easier to navigate and to understand for our audience, which are smaller, medium-sized companies. But I think it's important to say that the due diligence directive will take through all the various the 6 steps. So basically, I think at the core of a due diligence process is a risk assessment process. So you start with a commitment to human rights and to responsible business conduct towards human rights and the environment. Then you conduct a risk assessment of your value chain, understanding how do my business activities, how do the products that we source and design, how do they, and the development of these potentially negatively impact human rights and the environment. And when you have that risk assessment process in place, then you identify which mitigating actions you need to take it or to initiate in order to mitigate those risks. So, for instance, if you identify that you have an issue with discrimination and diversity within your company, then you make a policy on discrimination and diversity and agree on this is something that is important for us as a company. And then you start to measure how does the diversity composition look in our company. And if you see that there's an unbalance, then you start various activities to address that unbalance by defining targets, by developing training, etc. So that's how it works. You identify a theme, a risk area, agree on the ambition, and then you initiate various activities, all depending on what kind of it is. So that's integrating and acting on findings. Then you track and you monitor. So you define a target and you track how do we actually perform on this target. Then there's also part of it to communicate and report. Transparency to company behavior and company performance is very important part of the whole due diligence, so that you're transparent as a company. And then at the core of it is stakeholder engagement and access to remedy. so that you, as part of this process, engage with your stakeholders and your rights holders using a human rights terminology to ensure that you adequately address their risks. And also, if you have or access to remedy is a grievance mechanism, or having some kind of mechanism in place in order for those that might have their rights violated, a place to go for them to submit their grievances. So as you can see, it's a quite comprehensive process, which you need to work with step by step.
And as you said, comprehensive. So it's a lot of work,
Yes.
And it does sound like a big task. And I think a lot of the companies out there always are thinking, so where do we get started? Are we actually already doing something that might fit into the due diligence process? So I took these again from a guide, the guide that you have developed, just to get a picture on where is it good to get started, because as the first one mentions, what you've just explained takes a lot of time. So getting management on board is one of the first things that I think is quite important for each company to picture that this is a lot of work, and we need to assign people to do this. But can you maybe just mention or go through one of the other points as well?
Yes. So management support is, of course, absolutely critical, because without due diligence is something that which cuts across, as all sustainability work, it cuts across all the teams and the departments within a company. So you need to have a mandate, strong mandate from the management in order to interfere, you can say, with what the other teams and departments do, and have an opinion about how they work.
Yeah.
So the management support is the point of departure for doing due diligence, and also for defining, as I spoke to earlier, the ambition level on the various issues that you identify through the due diligence process. So management support is step one, basically. Then I think know your business is a way for us to trying to understand that, risk assessment, value chain, it can all be very abstract and difficult to understand, but basically it's about knowing your business. And know how are your products developed, who are your suppliers, how do you get the data from them. You need to know your business, you need to know where the products come from. You need to work towards getting the transparency down to the supply chain in order to know what are the risks associated with the products that you sell. So simply mapping your stakeholders, your business stakeholders, and drawing out your business stakeholders, starting to map your suppliers is also a starting point for doing the due diligence process. Then I think we also have a recommendation saying build on existing frameworks. And basically this means that if you, out of your due diligence and risk assessment process, identify, so we need to, we can see that we source from China. We know that there are a number of human rights risks associated with sourcing with China. We need to work with our suppliers one way or the other. Rather than developing your individual work stream towards your suppliers, you have to integrate it into procurement and sourcing, and the communication that you have and the business relationship and the negotiations that you have with your suppliers within procurement. Because otherwise you will end up in a situation where the buyers and the sources will have one type of dialogue. They will have one way of negotiating prices, negotiating quality, and then you will come as a sustainability or CSR person in the end and say, but we need tests on this and this and this, and you need to show us a BCA or BSCI report. And then there will be very conflicting messages from your perspective. So you need to integrate it and use the frameworks and the business operations that are in place already.
Yeah.
Prioritization is, of course, very, very important, because you cannot work with 15 priorities. You need to work on what is mostly urgent, and then built within the risk assessment process is looking into the severity to human rights and environmental damage, and that also it's important within the directive.
Yeah.
So if you have, let's say, something about which can be damaging to life and security, then you have to prioritize that before something else.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I think we'll just jump on to the next one, because this was one of the ones that you had been working on. We've just translated it to English as well. The one we had previously, it was the Danish one, but we've just translated it just to the English one. The 6 steps that you've worked with in collaboration with ETIS Denmark, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So this is there's both this one, and then the next slide will also show just a few an Excel sheet and a way to work with your risk assessment. So I just wanted to touch upon the fact that there are tools that you can use, and they are quite low practical still. Can you maybe just, I can also go back to the, I think I can. There we go. That this is the 6 steps that you would recommend to go through, but the practical sense in going through is still quite low practical, right? There aren't any solutions as of yet to work with it.
Yes, and I think that I will. ETIS Denmark, Ethical Trading Denmark. They have developed a portal which is called the 6 Steps. And they just launched it also in English, and they have a specific focus on also textile and fashion. So I would highly recommend that you go and visit that, because they have really tried to, because there's a lot of abbreviations, terminology that can be difficult to translate to what is it exactly that I need to do. So I would definitely recommend to go to their webpage, and for each step, what do we mean by commitments? How do I do this risk assessment and dealing with negative impacts? How do I do that? They have fairly hands-on operational descriptions on how this is done, and also with reference to tools that are out there, Excel sheets, etc., that you can use in your risk assessment or in understanding what do we mean by mitigating actions, right?
Yes.
So definitely that's a good tool. I think quite hands-on.
And then also just to mention the one that I've been referring to a couple of times from your own Danish Fashion and Textile, with the Human Rights Due Diligence Guide.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think what this guide does, it can be a useful tool, particularly in risk assessment process and in what do you need to do in order to address a risk. So that can actually, it's a sub tool to the 6 process tool.
And to anyone, just to the ones watching right now, you will also get sent this presentation out, so you don't have to be fast with your phones and with the QR code and everything. You'll get sent out the presentation as well, so that you can download. So one of the things that I also just wanted to go over is that Maria and I had talked about the fact that certification also can have a role in working with due diligence process. Can you maybe just take us a bit through that as well?
Yes, because I think certifications are exactly one way of addressing risks in your supply chain or in your company value chain. Again, all depending on what kind of risks that you have identified. Is it related to a certain material, or is it related to working conditions? Then there is a certification or a eco label which can address that specific risk. So if, for instance, you've mentioned FSC, so that's they work with sustainable forestry. So if you, for instance, use viscoses, it comes from forestry, then a way of ensuring that there are decent working conditions, that the harvesting of the trees is sustainable, etc., and also ensuring the transparency so that you are not engaged in illegal logging. Then if you identify that as one of your risk issues, then using the FSC certification to address that risk and mitigate that risk, then it's a useful tool. So that's basically how we recommend that companies work with the certifications as part of their due diligence process, because it is a tool to identify them.
Yeah.
There's not one certification that you can, if we done this certification, then we are click with everything called due diligence. There is I'm not quite sure it's over here, but there's called a DS49. So there's an ISO standard, but only or a Danish standard. It's not an ISO standard, it's a Danish standard called 49001, which is quite broad and covers sustainability and corporate responsibility quite broad. Yes, the B Corporation or the B Corp is also quite broad and comprehensive. So some of these certifications have a broader scope, particularly the company certifications rather than the product certifications.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And just again, with a QR code, this takes you into Deluxe's webpage, where we have made a comprehensive certification overview of many of the different certifications that you see here, and as well other certifications with explanations on what they entail, do it, don't do it, what does it take, and what does it cover. So if you want to see this, then you can also scan the QR code also later when you receive the presentation. So just a few questions here in the end before we wrap up. Why, just in general, why is due diligence important in the textile industry?
I think I will mention two reasons. One thing is, it's actually, when you have learned it, it's actually an extremely useful methodology for working strategically and systematically with sustainability. That's one thing. Second, it will be legal requirements, so you might as well get started.
Yeah, true. You might as well. Yeah. And the next question, which challenges do you then see for the fashion industry or the textile industry?
I think the complexity of the global supply chain is definitely a challenge. The fact that many of the companies within fashion and textile are small and medium-sized companies with limited leverage down the supply chain is also definitely a challenge. So I think these are some of the key challenges. Then there's also a barrier in terms of the terminology, which I sort of tried to explain a little bit along the way, because it is difficult to grasp what is it exactly that I do. So that's also a challenge that we see on a daily basis, actually, that this is difficult to understand and exactly understand how do I do this.
Yeah. And the last question is, what advice do you have for the companies out there that want to get started or should get started?
I think going back, why is it important? This is critical. This will be business critical, I think. So allowing yourself some time to learn about due diligence, understanding what it is my number one advice. Giving yourself some time to go through the 6 steps, scrolling through some of the guidelines that are in place, maybe not reading the law as it is right now, but going through the OECD guidelines and the human rights, the UN guiding principle, which explain about what due diligence is. And there's a lot of material which has been translated into Danish and which is accessible. And then simply make a plan, start bit by bit.
Good. That's good. Start bit by bit. Small pieces.
Small pieces, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Marie. This was very informative. There aren't actually any questions as of now. Does anybody have any questions? Then type them in. There is a small minute left. And if not, then thank you so much, Marie, for joining me today. This was really exciting. As I said, this presentation will be sent out to everyone so that you can revisit and use the QR codes to scan for the 2 different guides that there are. So thank you so much, and have a lovely Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.